Okay, folks, so the next essay question is going to focus back onto the unit of diverse places. Now, it's important, yeah, you're currently covering globalisation, but it's also important that you keep referring back to the previous unit for paper 2 for the human geography side of the course, because you need to keep reviewing, you need to keep consolidating all the content, all the case study information that you've previously studied, and apply that to a variety of different exam questions. So in the diverse places section of the final exam for paper 2, we know that you will get a 20-mark evaluate question. And there's only 2 places in the final exam that you'll get a 20-mark evaluate question. One of them is in diverse places, and the other one is in migration, identity and sovereignty, which you won't study until year 13. So 20-mark evaluate questions, similar to 12-mark assess questions, but with some key differences, and are obviously longer and obviously more detailed because they're 20 marks and not 12. So what I want to do is explore with you this question that I have created based on the specification. It says, evaluate this statement. Population structures vary from place to place and over time, 20 marks. So often you'll get an evaluate question for 20 marks that focuses on a statement. Not always, and there's a variety of different methods, but it can be a statement that you then need to evaluate. So the link to the spec, the bits that you've already studied, population structure varies from place to place and over time. You can see it's almost identical to the question that I've set you. The specific parts of the spec, the content aspect, have a quick read of the left and the right hand side points A, B and C, because that's the content, that's the case studies that you have studied, which may well be very, very useful for answering this question. So have a quick look. So hopefully that's reminded you that when we're talking about population structure of any place, of any country, it's not just things like birth rates, death rates, life expectancy. There's a lot more to it than that, because on the right hand side you can see that population structure does include things on gender, on ethnicity, on culture, fertility, mortality. It's a lot more than those general characteristics you would see on a population pyramid. So you need to look at both sides of that and try and include as much of that into the essay as is possible. So, well, that shouldn't have appeared, but never mind. What I want to look at now with you is the command word, like we did in the 12-mark assess question. So the command word here is evaluate. Now, a lot of students in year 12 and 13 find evaluate questions easier than the assess, because because you don't necessarily need to put them in any priority order or make a decision on what is the main factor or main reason or main cause or effect. What you're doing here technically is exploring both sides of an argument, of a point, or giving arguments in favour or arguments against, something like that. So this bit of blurb here is from the specification, and you can see it's very different to the assess. It is extended writing, and the key bit, which you can see in bold there, in the end you'll come to a judgment, you'll make a conclusion, you'll come to a view based on the question and the evidence that you have explained and outlined with case study examples throughout the essay. And have a look at the final bit there, where you see where it starts. Evaluation will be judgmental, but not necessarily unequivocal. Now that's important. It then says, recognise that there is always a counter argument, and that's technically what you're doing in a 20-mark essay question. You are creating an argument. You're creating debate within the answer itself. So, some suggestions for you for every 20-mark evaluate question. The same suggestions will apply. You need to show a debate. You need to show both sides. Create that argument in your answer. Secondly, you need two arguments in favour or supporting or backing up or advantages, whatever the question is asking you to do, in two separate paragraphs. Now you'll see why that becomes important when you start to look at the mark schemes. It doesn't matter. Sorry, I should have then put another point. You need then two arguments against or not backing up or disadvantages of the statement. So you technically then have 4 paragraphs, 2 arguing in favour or supporting, backing up, advantages, and 2 arguments against. So point 3 there then says it does not matter what order both sides are written, but you need to make sure the essay flows. Now, there's different options of structure for 20 markers because there's no priority order, but that's down to you, your preference as to how you want to order it. But at the end, as I said, you need to come to a view, a conclusion, based on the evidence that you've given for both sides of the argument. So, let's look at the actual structure, breaking down the questions. So, paragraph 1, again, is exactly the same as what you would do in a 12-mark essay. Short introduction, where you outline, define, explain the key terms that are associated with the question. Now, what you may end up finding for a 20-mark question is you're actually defining, excuse me, defining, explaining a few more key terms. So, some examples here. And what you've got to try and do is pick out the questions from the words in the question. Sorry, pick out the key terms from the words. So the first word that appears is population. So that includes things such as population density, population structure. So you need to be defining those aspects of population. Now look at that point that I've put next to structure. Structure includes numerous different aspects, like I said before, the ones that you'll see on a population pyramid. But don't forget about ethnicity and culture and the cultural aspects of a population structure. It refers to the word place. So you do need to define the term placed in a geographical context. You could, you don't have to, but you could refer to the rural-urban continuum theory here. And that means that you'll be describing and explaining the differences between rural and urban and the different points on the continuum. And then the hard one is looking at the words over time. And this is hinting really at how population changes over time on the demographic transition model. Now, go back to that, review the DTM, because that's important. And that includes population structure. But I think you would need a clear definition or an outline, very brief, of what the DTM actually is and what does it show. And you'll see then how you can use that throughout the essay. So have a look at those points. I'm not saying you need to define every single one of those. Some of you will, some of you won't. But you've got to try and keep it concise to the point. There's a risk in a 20-mark essay question in the introduction, you're defining so many key terms that you end up going over half a page. That's too much. Keep it concise. So then comes the point where you need to think, well, how am I going to create two sides to this? What are the arguments in favour or supporting or the advantages or whatever it is? And what are the two arguments against? So this is where you're starting to create the debate in your answer. So I've got, what I'm going to put up here is a suggestion. This is not the only way to answer this. I'll say that again. It is not the only way. This is a suggestion. This is an example of what could be done. You can do it your own way. So, as I've said, you need to think about what are the two sides going to be in terms of content. One option could be this. So, you need supporting points. So when you're looking at your supporting points, you're thinking about how population structures do actually vary. Basically, they are different in different places. Now, I've bolded the word places because place appears in the question. So what you're technically doing here is looking at the difference between a rural place and an urban place, for example. So another supporting point in a separate paragraph could be that population, again, structures do vary, are different, but in this case, over time. So you're exploring the other part of the question. And I've put there, are different over time in both rural and rural places as these places change over time. Now, I made a mistake there. I said rural and urban places as these places change over time. So the last point is rural and urban areas, population structures both change for different reasons. So a rural area in this Bedfordshire, for example, will change over time. An urban place such as London or London Docklands will change over time for different reasons, but they're still changing. So you're supporting the statement. Now what you've then got to do is look at the counter arguments. So you need some points that go against the statement. So in this case, population structures do not vary. That, now I've been crafty here, that much. We all know rural areas change and urban areas change. But which change more? So I've put there population structures do not vary that much from place to place. Now, again, this is where you're basically referring back to the rural-urban continuum. Because the rural-urban continuum shows different places at different stages. So refer to the rural-urban continuum to show that rural areas at the same position in that continuum do not have major differences. There will be slight differences, but they will not be major. Then your final paragraph has got to go against the statement. Have a quick read of that. Whilst I close the door. So it says population structures do not vary that much again, but this time you're looking over time. So what I've put here is, have the majority of rural areas changed as fast as urban areas? So we're looking more at the speed, and maybe not. Maybe rural areas, countryside areas, they had changed, but they haven't changed as fast as urban areas. And this is where if I was doing this, I would bring in the ethnical and the cultural aspects of rural areas. Have they changed really that much over time? Maybe not. Depends what examples you use. Urban areas have. So this could be an avenue that you want to explore in that final paragraph. So just have a quick, I'm going to pause for 30 seconds, just have a quick read back over that and look at the different arguments supporting, the different arguments against, and just remind yourself, this is only one way of doing this. It's not the only way. Okay, so example structure for your paragraph 2. Now you've already done paragraph 1. Paragraph 1 was your introduction with your key terms. So paragraph 2 is where you jump straight into the argument. So the first point is paragraph 2, argument in favour of the statement. Again, you don't have to do it in this order. This is a suggestion. Supporting points, population structures do vary, are different in different places. Now again, this is where your structure of your paragraph is exactly the same as your 12-mark assess questions. Explain the above point in argument in favour in general geographical terms first. No case study examples yet. Once you've generally explained it with your geographical terminology and your explanations to argue in favour of the statement, then you bring in a case study example, a place. to back up your geographical explanation. And again, use Peel. Make your point, which is your argument in favour, explain that point, then use your example and your evidence, then finish off with a sentence linking the whole paragraph back to the question. So paragraph 3, this is where you're doing exactly the same thing, but for another argument in favour of the statement. So go back to my second or third slide. This supporting point could be population structures do vary, are different, but this time over time in both rural and urban, sorry, change the rural and urban places, as these places change over time. So third bullet point, explain it generally first. No case study yet. Then bring in your case study to back it up and make sure the paragraph is peeled. And then paragraph 4, exactly the same again, your second argument going against the statement. Now this is where you've got to be a bit crafty, because sometimes it's quite difficult to come up with two arguments in favour, two arguments against that are totally against or totally in favour. So you've got to sort of manipulate the question a little bit. So here, argument going against the statement, and going back to my previous point, the population structures do not vary that much, and that's the manipulative bit, that much from place to place. And this is where I've said refer back to the rural-urban continuum to show that rural areas at the same position do not have major differences. Oops, sorry. Explain it generally first, back it up with case studies, make sure it's peeled. And then your final argument against. And again, this is where you're sort of manipulating the question a little bit again. So you're going against the statement, population structures do not vary that much over time. And this is where I suggested that you bring in the cultural and the ethnic side of population structure, because rural areas, urban areas have changed over time, but has the specific ethnicity and cultural aspects of those places changed at the same rate? Urban areas, yes. Rural areas, obviously, no. Explain that in general geographical terms first. So explain why smaller rural areas, their culture, their ethnic background, their diversity hasn't changed that much over time, and why that is. And you can create a little comparison within the paragraph itself, basically saying, well, urban areas have changed more over time with ethnicity and culture and diversity, and give the reasons. But then you've got to back up your case study example. Choose a rural area that you studied. Look at Shefford, maybe, for example. Look at your local and your contrasting places, and then compare that to Luton. We all know from the case studies that you've looked at, Shefford's culture, Shefford's diversity and ethnicity, religious aspects have not changed that much over time compared to Luton. And then, of course, peel it. And then finally, the biggest difference, as we know, for an evaluate 20-mark essay question is your paragraph 6. This is your conclusion. And your conclusion needs to be based on the information examples you have outlined and explained in the essay so far. You need to make a judgment. You need to come to a view. Now that's difficult, because many of you, if you've put arguments in favour, two arguments against, you'll be thinking, well, I can't come to an overall judgment. So sitting on the fence, as I call it, is fine, but you then need to explain why one overall view, either in favour or either against, cannot be generated based on a variety of evidence for both sides. You can come to a conclusion which is arguing in favour or against, providing you can give a clear reason for doing so. Now, the key point to note here is there is no right or wrong answer. The examiner is not looking for you to come to the conclusion in agreeing to the statement or disagreeing with the statement. They're not after that. They're after a student portraying both sides, different arguments, creating that debate, then creating a viewpoint based on that debate, based on that discussion. And that viewpoint is entirely up to you, providing you can back it up. So go back through that. You might have to listen to this 2 or 3 times. Then you've got to go back to your content, the stuff you've studied from diverse places for inquiry question 1, and also inquiry question 2 as well, and look at the content. What are the arguments? What detail can you add to them? And then what case study examples are you going to be using in each paragraph to back up the points you're making? Now, if any of you need any more support and advice on that, ping me an email. Quite happy to help. And as I said in the others, please take this question and use it as one of your fortnightly extra exam question practices that you're going to submit to Mr. Rao or to me for marking and feedback during that 2-week period. You might as well, I mean, you don't have to, you can just use this as another piece of practice that you don't submit, and then you choose another question. It's entirely up to you, but some of you I know will want to use this question with this guidance to answer it and then get feedback on it. Absolutely fine. So good luck. Give us a shout if you need any help, and I think I've talked quite enough.